Professor Sheehy.
Yes, I was just unmuting.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, honorable senators, and thank you for hearing me. I'm a professor emerita at the University of Ottawa, where I taught criminal law and procedure for 34 years. I've researched and published extensively on the subject of the criminal law's targeted and discriminatory impact on disenfranchised Canadians. I'm also the sister of Matthew, my younger brother, who has developmental disabilities as well as some physical disabilities. I have firsthand experience with medical professionals who have both directly and indirectly urged us to consider do not resuscitate orders when Matthew has required medical treatment. I'm testifying to add my voice to the clear and unequivocal opposition expressed unanimously by disability rights groups across this country to Bill C-7. The bill suffers intolerably in both its process and its substance. In terms of process, the bill's proponents ask us to accept the urgency of assisted death for people with disabilities rather than wait for the scheduled review of medical assistance in dying that was supposed to take place in 2020. Instead, we will effectively count the bodies after the deed is done. We are also asked to believe that Bill C-7 is demanded by a Quebec Superior Court decision that declared unconstitutional the current law's requirement that death be reasonably foreseeable. This is utter nonsense. Truchon is a trial-level decision that's not even binding on Quebec courts above the Cour du Québec, let alone across the country. It's almost unheard of for the federal government to fail to defend its own law by invoking the appeal process. It's particularly true for a law developed so recently through compromise and careful consideration of its impacts. In contrast, this government has actively fought multiple rulings by the Canadian Human Rights Commission and even the UN regarding discrimination against Indigenous women and children. One ruling was made 5 years ago, this January, and our government is still spending millions to resist remedying its willful and reckless discrimination against 165,000 Indigenous kids. My final point about the appalling process unfolding around this bill is that the government has failed to engage in a thorough and respectful consultation with those groups who are clearly targeted by the bill. Only a handful of disability groups were consulted as if they were stakeholders like any others. And the unified opposition of all major disability groups in this country to Bill C-7 has been tossed aside as words on the wind. The substance of the bill is even more intolerable by removing the one safeguard that was promised as protection for people with disabilities when medical assistance in dying was legislated, the reasonable foreseeability of death requirement. The bill singles out disability as the precipitating condition for assisted death. No other group of Canadians will be supported in their wish to end their lives due to suffering. This amounts to discrimination on the basis of disability, contrary to Section 15 of our Charter. It imposes a significant social burden by its message that disabled lives are not worth living or worth saving. And its discriminatory effect is intensified because, as Professor Isabel Grant states, we know that people with disabling and irremediable conditions are disproportionately older women, disproportionately Indigenous, and disproportionately unemployed, poor, and socially isolated. The government's pursuit of this bill, regardless of its impact on people with disabilities and racialized communities, raises the question of who this bill is for. The answer from disability activist Diane Coleman, founder and president of the organization Not Dead Yet, is that it is for those who are well but worried, well off and white. No doubt there may be some individuals with disabilities who do not fit this profile and who support this bill, but let us be clear. The Supreme Court has not pronounced a constitutional right to government-assisted death for those who are not dying. This bill allows individual demands to trample over the group-based constitutional rights of people with disabilities. The preamble to the bill states that Canada is a state party to the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and recognizes its obligations under it. But these are cynical, empty words. The bill runs roughshod over our obligations. A statement released by the UN Special Rapporteur for the Rights of People with Disabilities is unequivocal. Under no circumstance should the law provide that it could be a well-reasoned decision for a person with a disabling condition who is not dying to terminate their life with the support of the state. The claimed safeguards contained in the bill are nothing of the sort. The requirement that a person choose to end their life is meaningless where those choices are constrained by systemic inequalities like poverty, racism, homelessness, and limited access to services. Even our Supreme Court has recognized that choice in this context does not relieve discrimination. The requirement that the request be witnessed by an independent witness is undercut by permitting the patient's paid caregiver to act as a witness, even though we know that there's frequently a power imbalance in such relationships, as well as a high risk of abuse. The requirement that the person be assessed over a 90-day period in order to explore whether there are treatments or services that could alleviate their suffering is far from adequate. Given that wait lists for chronic pain specialists are 2 years long in some provinces, and that, for example, Alberta has up to a 1-year wait just for a wheelchair for people with spinal cord injuries, a 90-day period is a cruel joke. For what other group would we wait only 90 days before granting their wish to end their lives when they're not dying? Finally, the requirements that the person be informed of available services and supports to relieve their suffering, and that along with the assessing practitioners, the person agree that these measures have been seriously considered, are empty words. There's no corresponding obligation on the state or the assessors to seek out and actually provide the necessary resources to alleviate the person's suffering. From a personal perspective, I can only imagine that the question of whether my brother Matthew should be resuscitated will become an even more persistent inquiry than we have already experienced as a family. I urge you to reconsider and withdraw this misbegotten bill and to instead move Canada forward with the mandate of social, economic, and political inclusion for those with disabilities. Thank you.